Chapter 2048. Sisterly did not dare to say this to young master. She only said carefully, "Why don't you let Miss go out for a walk? Who knows, she might be able to eat when she is in a good mood." Yi Muyun looked at Sisterly without any expression. Sisterly's heart skipped a beat. This young Master Muyun was young and not a member of the Tang family. However, he had that kind of prestige that made everyone in the family respect him and not dare to look down on him. Just by looking at him now, Sisterly did not dare to act rashly again. Instead, Yi Muyun said calmly, "What is there to eat in the kitchen now? I will bring it up." Sisterly's heart relaxed as she said, "That's for the best. Miss listens to young master the most." She turned around and prepared a tray with soup, 2 plates of vegetables, and a small bowl of rice. They were all Miss's favorite food. Young master would feed her later and it would be back soon. Yi Muyun put down the briefcase and unbuttoned the top 2 buttons of his shirt before walking upstairs slowly. Upstairs, Cher was throwing a tantrum. Everything that could be smashed in his bedroom had been smashed. Some of them were even masterpieces that he had painstakingly collected. Yi Muyun stood at the door and looked at the mess in the room. The culprit was curled up at the head of the bed, sulking. "You're angry with me. You don't have a grudge with these things, right?" Yi Muyun laughed and walked around the broken pieces. He placed the food on the bedside table and looked down at her. She was probably furious. She did not wash her face and laid there in her pajamas. She did not even lift her eyelids when he came back. "Eat something." He sat at the head of the bed and wanted to carry her with one hand. However, Cher avoided him. Her little face was a little pale and her voice was a little hoarse. "Do you think that I won't know what happened outside just because you locked me here?" Yi Muyun's gaze was indifferent as he looked at her. After a long time, he said, "It seems that you know everything." "Yes. I know that Zhou Chongguang's father passed away. At a time like this, why do you still want to forcefully buy it?" She shook her head. "I don't understand why you do this. Just because he went to see me once, even without my knowledge." Yi Muyun put down the bowl in his hand, and his expression became even more indifferent. "Cher, it's the law of the jungle in the business world. I can only say that I'm sorry. To me or to Zhou Chongguang." Cher pursed her lips. "Gu Mei is in jail. I heard that she will be sentenced to 3 years. Zhou Chongguang's father is dead. Don't tell me it has nothing to do with the acquisition. So, what's your conclusion?" Yi Muyun's lips curled into a cold smile. "Use the 20% you have to veto, huh?" Cher's heart was beating wildly. She stared at him for a long time before gritting her teeth. "So you're locking me up like this? Am I right? When you grow up, you will know how important Rongguang's acquisition is to the development of Boyi. I didn't do it for personal reasons, but I don't deny that it started out because of anger." He was straightforward. Cher's eyes were wide open. She looked at him as if she didn't know him. She knew that he was very capable and had put in a lot of effort to climb to the position of vice president at the age of 20, but she had always thought that he was at most 25 years old. But now she found that his cruelty was far beyond what she had imagined. He could talk about the Zhou family's misfortune as if it had nothing to do with him. Chapter 2049. She looked at him as if she didn't know him. She looked at him carefully, trying to find a trace of familiarity, but there was nothing. She looked at him as if she was looking at a cold-blooded businessman. After a while, Cher said, "What if I don't use the 20% veto? What if I use myself to exchange for it?" The next second, he pinched her chin. His face was full of anger. "Take back what you said." He understood what she meant. If he didn't revoke the acquisition of Glory, he would lose her. I won't. She boldly went against him, her voice calm and cold. You can choose to let Bo E gain glory, but I can also choose to let you lose everything you have now. Yi Muyun stared at her little face. His gaze was deep, but his voice was calm. Do you know what you mean? It meant that all his hard work had been trampled by her. It meant that their relationship had never been equal. It meant that everything he had done for her had been in vain. Yi Muyun looked at her and smiled. Do you really want to do this? She didn't say anything. He continued, whether it's from Bo Yi's point of view or my own, the acquisition has become a reality. Share, you make your own choice. He got up and put the food on the bedside table. His tone was calm. Perhaps you've grown up and have your own ideas. As he said these words, he remained calm. She could feel that he was angry, but she didn't get angry, because she said that she would make all his hard work go to waste. She had actually hurt him. He got up slowly and walked towards the door. Cher's heart skipped a beat. She looked at him and her voice was a little panicked. Brother. He stood at the door and slowly turned to look at her. After looking at her for a long time, he asked softly, all these years, have you only treated me as your brother? Cher shook her head. No. He smiled faintly and said softly, I won't lock you up. You're right. You have 20%, so you have the right to veto everything. In the end, she had used this method to veto everything he had. Yi Muyun's heart was somewhat desolate. His voice became even softer. I'm willing to give you everything, including freedom. From the moment she said that, he knew that they could no longer be as simple as before. She was not only his sister, but also his boss. As Yi Muyun slowly walked out, countless thoughts flashed through his mind, 1,000 of them were all her. Cher suddenly got off the bed and hugged him from behind. She buried her face in his back and murmured, Brother. I'm sorry. Sorry. His voice was slightly mocking. What did you do to me? You just did what you wanted to do. Cher hugged him, but she did not feel the slightest bit of warmth. However, she did not want to let go. She did not want to let go. Brother, can I apologize to you? Her voice was very soft. I was talking nonsense. She said a lot, but he just calmly asked her, have you changed your mind? She was stunned. Cher, if I said that your vote would make it difficult for me to move forward in Boise, would you still vote for me? He asked her softly. She did not speak, and her breathing was also soft and shallow. Chapter 2050. After a long time, she said in a low voice, No. You still have me. Do you think I relied on women to stand firm in Boise? His voice suddenly deepened. He gently broke free from her and walked out. Cher looked at her empty hand in a daze. Was he really angry? Was her choice wrong? She stood there in a daze for a long time before turning back to look at the tray. She picked it up, sat on the sofa, and finished it. She brought the tray downstairs to show him. She was obedient, but there was no one downstairs. Sister Lee said that young master had gone out. Cher was a little disappointed, so she sat on the first floor and waited for him to come back. But he still hadn't come back by 10 at night. Cher couldn't help falling asleep. When she woke up, the night was already cold. She sat up and looked at the blanket covering her. She couldn't help looking around and called out unconsciously, Brother. Hurry up and go to sleep. Sister Lee appeared out of nowhere and said gently, Young master isn't back yet. Cher pursed her lips and looked at Sister Lee. He didn't call back. Sister Lee was speechless. She didn't know what to say. She knew that the two of them were at odds, but she didn't know it would turn out like this. Miss, Sister Lee, please don't say anything. No matter what, young master is the one who will walk with you to the end. Other people aren't that important, Sisterly said earnestly. Snow hugged her knees and grunted softly in acknowledgement. She slowly went upstairs and hesitated for a moment before going to his bedroom. The bedroom that she had smashed had been cleaned up and looked exactly the same as before. But when she walked in, she only felt that it was cold and empty. Gently lying on the bed, she sniffed the pillow that had his scent on it. She stayed up a little longer and finally fell asleep. When the sun shone into the bedroom, she woke up with a start. She looked around, but it was still quiet. He wasn't back. Cher had an indescribable feeling in her heart. She pursed her lips and felt her body drenched in sweat. Only then did she remember that she had a nightmare last night. After a moment of hesitation, he walked into the bathroom, took off his clothes, and took a shower. Less than a minute later, the bathroom door was pulled open. Cher was startled. Yi Muyun was standing at the door. Her voice murmured, "Brother." Yi Muyun's gaze quietly fell on her body, so deep that she couldn't understand it. But he didn't hug and kiss her like he usually did. He just glanced at her and said, "I'm going to the other bathroom." Cher was a little surprised. Before he left, she hugged him and stammered, "Actually, you don't have to. Is this considered throwing yourself into my arms?" He looked down at her without much expression on his face. She hesitated for a long time before whispering, "If I say yes, do you want it? You can't please a man with your body." He gently pushed her away and walked outside. Cher was embarrassed. Such a situation had never happened before. Did he not want her anymore? When she asked this, he paused and slowly turned to look at her. "Do you think so?" Her heartbeat quickened, and she kept looking at him. "I thought you wouldn't care so much." He laughed at himself and turned to walk out. Cher looked at his back. She couldn't chase after him naked, so she could only watch him leave. Chapter 2051. When she came out of the shower, he had already showered elsewhere and was putting on his clothes. He looked handsome and charming in a formal three-piece suit. She walked up to him and asked softly, "Where did you go last night?" "I went to the bar." He lowered his head slightly. "What else do you want to ask? Do you want to ask if I had an affair or if I was with someone else?" "I didn't." She denied it. Yi Muyun smiled. "If I was with someone else, would you not want me anymore?" "Yes." This time, her answer was firm. He looked at her for a long time before his lips curled into a smile that seemed to be happy and mocking at the same time. She couldn't tell, so she shamelessly followed behind him and whispered, "Have you thought about it?" Yi Muyun walked to the stairs and stopped. "There are still 3 days. Let's calm down." She only needed to think about her choice, but he had to let her choose and clean up after her mess. He didn't know why he was so indulgent. He only knew that after she had helped Zhou Chongguang like this and hurt him like this, he still didn't want to let go. After so many years, how could he let go of her just because he wanted to? Yi Muyun got into the car and started it. After a while, Guzhe called. His tone was indifferent. "Don't stop the acquisition. I want to make Rongguang's situation as bad as possible in these 3 days. By then, even if Cher signed the document, Rongguang would have no way out. If Zhou Chongguang was a smart manager, he would choose to cooperate with Bo Yi. By then, it would be up to Yi Muyun to decide whether things would be good or bad. Although it was a little troublesome, he didn't mind putting in more effort for the sake of his little girl. On the other side, Guzhe nodded and immediately got to work. In Pei Garden, Cher began to see Yi Muyun less and less. She still slept in his bedroom, but he always came back at dawn, and when he came back, he was drunk. Moreover, he had stopped kissing her and hugging her. She began to panic. Did he not want her anymore? Finally, the day before signing the documents, Yi Muyun came back very early. Cher was still awake. She was curled up on the sofa, her pointy little face buried in her knees. When she saw him come back, her eyes lit up and she stared at him. How have you been thinking these past few days? Yi Muyun took off his jacket and slowly squatted down. He reached out to brush away the messy hair on her face and looked at her tenderly. At that moment, his gentleness made her think that the quarrel a few days ago was just an illusion. In fact, they had always been fine, and she had just had a dream. She sat up, her heart pounding as she looked at him. You went home. This is my home, why wouldn't I come back? He reached out to pinch her little face. If you still don't want to talk about it, I'll go take a shower first. With that said, he was about to get up, but Cher's sharp nose picked up the scent of perfume from his body. She was stunned. He had gone to the bar again tonight, and then he had a woman's scent on him. What had he done? She grabbed him with her fingertips and didn't let go. What's wrong? He asked her good-naturedly. Schwaber lifted her eyes and looked at him. You went to the bar again. He didn't deny it. He smiled and said, yes. I think freedom is relative. You can't expect me to work from 9 to 5 and report to you when you're free, can you? Chapter 2052. She was speechless for a long time before she asked, what's the limit of your freedom? Does it include having other women? When she asked, her breathing was light and painful. Her heart felt like it was being pressed by something. It was extremely uncomfortable. Yi Muyun looked at her and said calmly, if you don't mind. I mind. She said softly. He smiled and did not say anything. He pulled his tie and walked to the bathroom. Cher turned around and looked at his back. Then, she followed him boldly. Just as she entered, his shirt was thrown at her, covering her little face with it. The faint smell of his perfume almost drove her crazy. She tore it off and was about to throw it into the trash can. But her hand paused, because she saw a bright red lipstick mark on her neckline. A woman's lipstick mark. Was it left by a woman? What kind of situation did she leave the lipstick mark on? She was a little dazed and did not dare to question him. She could only hold the shirt and stare at it, sulking. About a minute later, she threw the shirt into the trash can and walked out, closing the door loudly. He must have heard it. Now, she did not want to talk to him anymore. Yi Muyun was in the bathroom. When he heard the noise outside, he smiled. She would probably sign against it tomorrow. A lipstick mark was enough to strengthen her resolve. The alcohol in the bar was not for nothing. But that lipstick mark. Guze's lips were quite small. He did not notice it before. He was quite happy that she was angry now. His anger had not dissipated yet, so it was best that she was angry. They could be angry together, he thought childishly. And he made such a decision after careful consideration. He knew her well enough to know that if she signed such a contract, she would feel guilty towards him. Yes, he was still scheming against her. In love, scheming didn't mean that he did not love her, but that he loved her too much. So, he had to scheme against her again and again to keep her by his side. However, Yi Muyun had schemed against himself and Cher, but not Zhou Chongwang. That was really a good seedling to play with conspiracies and schemes. Later, when he walked out, Cher was no longer in his bedroom. He looked around, smiled, put on his bathrobe, and walked out. He stood in front of her room and knocked on the door. Cher. There was no sound inside. After a while, he heard a shattering sound. She must have lost her temper again and smashed something. What a childish temper. She clearly saw it, but she didn't dare to tell him that she was sulking. Yi Muyun smiled faintly and cleared her throat. Are you angry? Nothing happened. Pervert. She sounded like she was about to cry. You've already kissed me, but you haven't done anything yet. Yi Muyun didn't say anything more. He went downstairs and called his sisterly to comfort her. On the one hand, he wanted to make sure she didn't hurt herself. Sisterly looked at her young master's eyes, which seemed to have turned gloomy. She was quite happy in her heart. He took the key and went in to comfort her for a long time. However, when he came out, he looked at Yi Muyun with a complicated expression. Young master, you're not even married yet, but you're already drinking with women. Miss is very sad. If you do this again in the future, I'm afraid she won't forgive you. Chapter 2053. Sisterly gave him another reproachful look before she slowly walked downstairs to give the couple some space. Yi Muyun stood at the door of her room for a while and heard the sound of crying. His heart ached, but he didn't go in. He kept listening with a slight smile on his face. It was as if her crying was something that made him happy. Until late at night, she stopped crying. She probably fell asleep. No matter how long she cried, he would stay by her side. It was almost dawn when he finally left. Cher woke up at dawn with her eyes swollen. When she got up, she threw a tantrum again and wanted to smash the room. Of course, she went to his bedroom and smashed it again. Anyway, she smashed whatever he liked. It was 9:00 before she changed into a dark blue dress and went to Boyi in old Zhao's car. She walked along the corridor of the meeting room, her heart pounding. She knew what it meant. But she was still willing to do it. She had been hesitant at first, but what happened last night made her hesitation go to hell. She knew that she had let her emotions get the better of her. She signed this document because of Yi Muyun and not because of Zhou Chongguang or Gu Mei. The billions of yuan was the result of their anger. Gu Zhe was already waiting at the door. When he saw her coming, he took the initiative to ask again, "Have you thought it through? After all, this concerns Mr. Ye's position in Boyi." The CEO wanted to promote Mr. Yi to the position of CEO after we acquired Glory. You know what I mean. Cher pursed her lips. There's no need to think about it. I've already decided. With that, she walked straight into the meeting room. In the end, such a big acquisition was ended because of her opposition. The executives of Boyi were shocked and in an uproar. But most of them were not against Yi Muyun, but against Cher. She was the only descendant of the Tang family, and it was obvious that her behavior today had angered the shareholders. She was obviously not a good leader. Such behavior had doomed her to never become the CEO of Boyi. Although most people knew that the future CEO would be Mr. Yi. However, Cher's actions still deeply hurt the shareholders' hearts. In contrast, Yi Muyun was much calmer. He looked at her lightly. Are you sure? Cher nodded. Yes, I'm sure. After she finished signing, she didn't want to look at him, so she threw the pen away and left. Yi Muyun still had things to deal with, so he gave Gu Zhe a look and asked him to stop Cher at the door. Gu Zhe understood tacitly and restrained the man. The door of the meeting room was closed again. Without Cher knowing, Yi Muyun had used his own methods to appease the shareholders, guaranteeing that Glory Light would be acquired. Only then did the matter settle down. However, everyone in Boyi also looked down on Yi Muyun. That was too much pampering, really too much. They even treated the company's matters as a joke, which made Bo Shuer happy. In this regard, Mr. Yi would have a headache. She was going to be engaged. If he didn't spoil her more, what if she ran away? After the meeting, it was already past lunchtime. When he returned to the office, Cher was still there. The lunch on the table was untouched. She was curled up on the sofa, as if she was sulking. Are you not angry now? He walked over and half squatted in front of her. Glory light has been saved. Are you not happy? Chapter 2054. Schwaer glared at him and snorted softly. You know it. He laughed and sat on the back of the sofa beside her. He reached out and rubbed her fluffy little head. Are you here today to sign or to denounce me, HM? She turned her head to the other side, obviously not wanting to talk to him. She even spat out 3 words, shameless. Yi Muyun chuckled. Are you going to let me off just like that after what happened last night? She turned her head and glared at him angrily, feeling a little embarrassed. If it were me, if there was even the slightest trace of a man on your body, I guarantee that I would break that man's leg. Then I would tie you to my side and not allow you to go anywhere. He chuckled. She did not know why, but she could hear a hint of seduction in his tone. Cher was puzzled. Why was he happy instead of angry that she had signed something like that? She looked at him suspiciously. Did you do something to let me down last night? He played with her long hair and replied nonchalantly, do you want to know how I spent last night? No. She covered her ears and stood up immediately. I want to go home. However, she had only taken 2 steps when he pulled her back and she sat in his arms. She was embarrassed and angry as she struggled with all her might. However, he did not intend to let go of her. He locked her in his arms and kissed her passionately. She threw a tantrum in his arms and did not let him kiss her. She especially did not let him have his way, but he always had a way to deal with her. In the end, she was folded in his arms and kissed deeply. As their lips and teeth intertwined, he murmured her name, making her heart warm up. Her head was dizzy. At that moment, she forgot about Zhou Chongwang and the matter of him drinking with prostitutes. It was as though they had returned to the past, where there was only the 2 of them. After kissing for a long time, he forced himself to leave her mouth and pressed his forehead against hers. Last night, Guze drank too much and smeared a woman's lipstick on my collar. Cher's eyes widened. She refused to believe that such a thing could be done. But then, Mr. Yi took out a piece of paper. There were a few identical lip marks on it, just like the ones on his shirt last night. Cher stared at them for a long time before softly saying, you guys are really perverts. Even being with a woman was better than being with Guze. Did she think that not only would she have to snatch him from a woman, she would also have to snatch him from a man? He understood the meaning of her words and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He reached out and knocked on her forehead. What are you thinking? I did it on purpose. I'm not a pervert like you think. She knew better than anyone that he was straight, but if she didn't believe it, he could make her believe it now. Sensing the green light in his eyes, Cher reached out and stopped him. She said in a low voice, don't.
They were still in the office, and he would have scruples about what he wanted to do. In the end, he stopped and held her in his arms. He sighed softly. You're not angry anymore. Can we eat now? He rubbed his tummy. I'm really hungry now. Cher pouted. You deserve it. She hadn't expected that he would back down on the matter of glory. She thought that he would be angry, but in the end, he wasn't. Also, she believed him when he said that he was Guze. Because she was willing to believe him.
Chapter 2055. Yi Muyun was indeed hungry. After feeding her a little, he gobbled up the rest. After a few days of torment, not only was she tired, but he was also quite tired. At least, he had not had a good sleep for many days. Hence, he hugged the little girl and went to the lounge to lie down together. Perhaps it was because they had reconciled, or perhaps it was because they had let go of everything. Cher became softer and even took the initiative to lean into his arms, kiss his chin, and call him brother. "You're not angry anymore." He looked at her deeply, his fingers gently caressing her red lips. Cher hugged his waist a little shamelessly and only hummed softly. Yi Muyin originally only wanted to hug her and sleep for a while, but the little girl was humming and moaning at this moment. He felt a sense of naughtiness in his heart. He turned sideways and looked at her. His voice was low and husky, with a hint of coaxing. "I'm going to be busy for many days after this. Shouldn't you compensate me?" His gaze was too passionate, and her heart skipped a beat. Somehow, she knew what he wanted to do. She lowered her gaze and did not say a word. Her little face was completely red. His thin lips pressed against her ear, and he said a few words in a low voice. The little girl's face turned even redder. Then, he grabbed her little hand and brought her to him. She was nervous throughout the whole process, and he was even more confused than she was. She looked up and saw a faint blush in her eyes. She had never seen him in such a messed up state before. In the end, she was pressed into his arms and could hear his heart beating like thunder. His voice was low and husky, and there was a hint of secrecy in it. She did not dare to look or listen. She could only bury herself in his arms and tremble lightly. In the heat of passion, he raised his hand to take a tissue to wipe her hands. He said slowly, "Let's go to my parents' house tonight." Cher was a little nervous. She could not care less about her shyness and looked up at him. "Are we really going? An ugly daughter-in-law has to meet her in-laws eventually." He chuckled and reached out to pinch her little face, causing her to cry out, "You haven't washed your hands yet." He was still smiling as he whispered in her ear, "There are still people who use." The last few words were said in a low and husky voice, deliberately teasing her. Hearing this, the little girl raised her fist to greet him. He was so bad. "Maybe you'll like this in the future and beg me." He smiled, hugged her with one arm, and called Chin Anlin with the other. After talking for about 2 minutes, he hung up. After that, the man would always be slightly tired after indulging himself. In addition, they had a Cold War before, so he wanted to have a good sleep. He hugged the little girl a little tightly, as if he was hugging a small toy in his arms. Cher pursed her lips and complained, "Be gentler." He chuckled and patted her butt. "With me, there's no such thing as a light punishment." Her voice was as sweet as honey. "It hurts." He smiled and pressed her into his arms. He called her name softly and said, "Be good." Snow lay in his arms, feeling uneasy. "If I don't behave, will you stop liking me? Are you going to find another woman outside?" "That's right. You're not going to like me anymore." He glanced at her and replied, "Probably. So, there will only be one time." She replied with an "oh" and buried herself in his arms. She was also a little tired. Slowly, she fell asleep, in his arms. Chapter 2056. He listened and couldn't help laughing. He was a sleepy person, but now he couldn't fall asleep. Instead, he hugged her and coaxed her to sleep. After she fell asleep, Yi Muyun looked at her for a long time before gently pulling her little hands and feet away. Then, he quietly walked out of the lounge. Guze was waiting for him in the office. Seeing Yi Muyun come out, Guze said calmly, "The acquisition of Glory Light has been stopped. Although some people in the company have some complaints, it has been settled." Yi Muyun nodded, "Pressure Glory Light openly and secretly. I don't want to see them last until the end of the year. In addition, merge Glory Light into my private company." Guze nodded, but still hesitated. What if Cher knows Mr. Ye's plan? She won't know. After the engagement, I will send her to New York to study. My focus will also be in New York. Yi Muyun said calmly. Of course, when she finished her studies and returned to the country, there would be no more people like Zhou Chongguang in B City. He would no longer be a threat to her. Gu Zhe nodded. Mr. Ye's arrangement is perfect. Some things are not suitable for young girls. Yi Muyun looked at him and said calmly, what about Gu Mei? Are you really going to let her follow Zhou Chongguang in the future? Gu Zhe narrowed his eyes. When she comes out, I will send her abroad. He wouldn't allow his sister to follow someone who didn't love her. Yi Muyun didn't say anything more and opened the document, and neither he nor Gu Zhe noticed that the door of the lounge was opened a little, and a little person was standing behind the door, listening to their shocking words. Cher was a little stunned. It turned out that he didn't intend to let Zhou Chongguang go, but to deal with her. In private, he was still suppressing Rongguang. In the near future, Rongguang would still be acquired, but not by Boyi, but by Yi Muyun's own company. The blood in her entire body froze as she stared at that handsome figure in disbelief. Only now did she realize how naive she had been. He was so powerful that he was terrifyingly evil. Yes, he was extremely scary. She couldn't even touch his deep soul. The big brother who always hugged her and called her baby was just an illusion. Because of her, he didn't go home for a few days and purposely left lipstick marks on his white shirt. In order to appease her, he gave up his glory, but the truth was so unbearable. Cher stood there for a long time, so long that she felt dizzy. Was he the brother that she liked? At 5:00 in the afternoon, Yi Muyun finished his work and opened the door to the lounge. Cher was still lying on the bed with the blanket covering her face. Piggy. He sat by the bed and reached out to pinch her little nose. Shua grunted in acknowledgement and opened her eyes. Her face was naturally flushed from sleep, and she called out, Big brother. Get up, I'll take you home. Yi Muyun pinched her little nose, dragged her up and held her in his arms. He tidied her hair bit by bit and kissed her little nose. Our little yellow bun smells so good. I'm not a little yellow bun. She snorted. If you want to eat yellow bun, I'll buy you 2 baskets. Then they're called soup dumplings. He chuckled and his gaze fell somewhere. She was a little embarrassed. Shameless. Chapter 2057. The mirror in the elevator gave him a wicked idea. He pushed her to the side and kissed her fiercely. She could see how he kissed her shamelessly if she opened her eyes. The elevator opened and closed, but they couldn't get out of the elevator. When they finally reached the outdoor parking lot, the sky was already dark. She got into the car and hesitated for a moment before asking, Do you want to bring a gift? Yi Muyun got into the car and buckled his seatbelt. He put his hands on the steering wheel and smiled at her. That's what men do. Cher replied softly, It's my first time. Young lady, you still want your first time. He suddenly leaned over and whispered into her ear. She blushed and he couldn't help but caress her cheeks. I'm going to take it away on the night of the engagement. She blushed even more and looked away. When he couldn't see her, her face turned pale again. The car drove into the driveway and they arrived at the Chin residence after an hour. There were many children in the Chin family. The 2 younger ones went to boarding school. This was an inhumane request from Chin Anlin, the wife-doting maniac. As for Chin Mo and Chin Mu, they still lived together. When Yi Muyun arrived home, the twins had yet to return from their supplementary lessons at school. It wasn't the first time he brought Cher home. It was just that he had never done it so solemnly. He said he didn't need a gift, but he did bring one. He bought it himself. He gave Chin Anlin a piece of suet jade that he could play with in his hands. As for Yi Liangqiu, it was a black pearl the size of a man's thumb. Cher felt that she could kick it like a ball. The Chin family was naturally very welcoming of this young guest. The servants prepared a table of dishes and waited for the banquet to start. Yi Liangqiu held Cher's hand and went upstairs. She picked out a lot of jewelry that was suitable for a young girl from her collection. When Cher came downstairs, she felt that her hands and neck were about to break. She stood there clean and fair with all kinds of jewelry hanging on her body. They looked colorful but indescribably cute. Yi Muyun smiled faintly and shifted his gaze to his mother. He secretly sighed in his heart. His mother also spoiled Cher like a little daughter. How was she like a daughter-in-law? However, it was the best thing for a man that they could get along so well. Cher was still young, so Yi Liangqiu felt really guilty towards Tang Yu and Pei Chichi. Cher would only be 18 in a few days, and her son was already a beast. She felt that she shouldn't think too much about it. The more she thought about it, the more ashamed she was. However, her son was calm as if nothing had happened. He still married his wife, and his heartbeat did not increase at all. After sitting for about half an hour, Qin Mo and Qin Mu came back. They were 14 years old and had grown up very well. Qin Mo had been a smiling tiger since he was a child. The adults in his family all said that he could deceive people with a smile and help him count money. Mu, on the other hand, was much quieter and had a cold temperament, a bit like Yi Liangqiu. When the two children saw Yi Muyun coming back, they both rushed over and affectionately called him brother. Cher was used to calling him brother, so she was not used to hearing them call him brother. Yi Muyun suddenly came over and said in a low voice, "After we get married, you're the only one allowed to call me brother, huh?" Chapter 2058. She didn't say anything, so he smiled in a low voice, took her little hand, and got up. "Okay, let's eat." He was like the head of the family. After that, the two little ones followed him, which made Cher a little speechless. She turned her head and saw Qin Mu's slim and graceful appearance. Qin Mu was not like her. At the age of 14, she was still a little bean sprout. Because of Yi Liangqiu's genes, Qin Mu was very tall. At the age of 14, she had grown to nearly 170, like a big girl. Cher was only in her early 160s. Looking at little Mumu, she couldn't help sticking out her tongue and making a face. Qin Mu smiled faintly. His demure appearance was extremely similar to Yi Liangqiu's. Thus, among all the children, the one Qin Anlin doted on the most was Mumu. Yi Muyun could more or less guess the dark thoughts within these few days. He also felt a little emotional in his heart. These years, when he lived apart from his parents, his father was also indifferent to him. It was not because he was estranged, but because he was becoming more and more like his father. He thought silently in his heart, "Fortunately, my father is not so narcissistic. If he appreciates me very much, it will be a little awkward." While thinking about it, he had already taken the little girl to the dining room. He solemnly pressed her to the seat on his right, which was the position of the daughter-in-law of the Qin family. Cher was also born in a big family. How could she not see it? She just hesitated for a moment and sat down. The two little ones sat opposite them with a secret smile, while Qin Anlin and Yi Liangqiu sat on both sides. The sumptuous dishes were served one after another, and Shua discovered that they were all dishes that she liked to eat, but her big brother was usually in control of them. She tilted her head and smiled sweetly at Yi Liangqiu. "Thank you, Aunt Liang. Thank you for your brother. Every time he comes back to eat, he will tell you what you like, what you don't like, what you like to eat, and what you can't eat often. So today I want to make you happy since I'm so happy." When she said this, Mr. Yi couldn't help but blush. He looked at his mother and said, "Mom, you can't spoil her like this." As he spoke, he reached out and pinched Cher's little face, his voice full of threat. you know how much you should eat, okay? Otherwise, I'll have to call the doctor when I get a stomachache. Before Cher could say anything, Yi Liangqiu began to reprimand her son, Mu Yun, you're too strict. Cher is an adult now. She knows her limits. She picked up some seafood with her chopsticks and gave it to Cher with a smile. Our Cher won't eat anything. Cher looked at the respectful Aunt Liang, and her heart was clear. If her brother's attitude was rough, then Aunt Liang was the shrewd one. Although she had prepared a table full of dishes for her to eat, her attitude was still there. She could eat as much as she wanted. So the little girl leaned against Yi Muyun, leaning against him, and looked here and there from time to time. Yi Muyun would frown first and then glare at her. But in the end, he would still force her to eat. Yi Liangqiu looked at her son with a smile. In fact, the person who spoiled her was her son. Facing his mother's gaze, Yi Muyun looked a little embarrassed and avoided it. But the two little ones kept smiling, and he couldn't do anything to them. Chapter 2059. Watching the two girls go upstairs one after another, Yi Liangqiu smiled and said, if Cher doesn't grow up, she won't look like my granddaughter in the future. You're belittling yourself, Mrs. Qin. Qin Anlin flipped through the newspaper and smiled faintly. Mrs. Qin, you look very young, in your early 30s at most. How can you be a grandmother? Yi Liangqiu glanced at him and pulled Yi Muyun to the tea room to talk. The servant brought them 2 cups of fragrant tea and closed the door. There were only the mother and son in the small room, so there was nothing that couldn't be said. I heard that you haven't been getting along with Rongguang recently, but it seems that you cancelled the acquisition of Rongguang today. What's going on? Yi Liangqiu was still in charge of King Entertainment and had a wide network of contacts. Things in the business world couldn't be hidden from her. Yi Muyun took a sip of tea and smiled faintly. Mom, didn't you hear that Cher signed an objection agreement today, so the acquisition plan was aborted? Of course, Yi Liangqiu knew about it, but she was more worried because she knew her son's temper too well. If he wanted to do something, no one could stop him. Moreover, she had asked Gu Zhe last time, and he said that the young man named Zhou Chongguang liked Cher. This was probably the reason why her son was unhappy. Otherwise, why would he fight a battle that he wasn't confident of winning from the beginning? Yi Liangqiu was angry and amused at the same time. If it wasn't Rongguang, but another powerful company, Mu Yun wouldn't be able to put down his pride if he couldn't take it down. But now, what she was most worried about was Cher's objection was useless. Mu Yun was still doing things his own way. She said with concern, I saw that Cher was quite happy today. The matter with Rongguang shouldn't have affected your relationship. Mu Yun, quit while you're ahead. Nothing is more important than your relationship. After she said all this, Yi Muyun simply held his cup and did not speak. Yi Liangqiu understood his true thoughts and worriedly said, does your Uncle Tang know that you've been working on your own company these past few years? Yi Muyun nodded. Yi Liangqiu thought for a moment and said, you want to take Rongguang for yourself, right? Yes. At this point, if I don't take Rongguang for myself, all my previous investments will be in vain. Yi Muyun said frankly. This time, Yi Liangqiu was silent for a long time before he asked softly, Muyun, is this part of your plan? You calculated that Cher would object, so you just sat back and reaped the benefits, didn't you? Yi Muyun thought for a moment and said, let's put it this way. Uncle Tang has always been aware of Boyi's movements. He is very supportive of the acquisition of Rongguang. His opinion on how to deal with Rongguang is the same as mine. Of course, after the acquisition of Rongguang, I will transfer 20% of the company's shares to Cher. After he said that, Yi Liangqiu was a little stunned. After a while, she said softly, Cher isn't a child anymore. Isn't this too cruel for her? She had thought that the people around her would care about her feelings, but in the end, it was just a lie to make her happy. Yimuyun drank the last sip of tea in his cup and said calmly, "The business world has always been cruel. She shouldn't have gotten involved. I was just looking for a reason to get her out." Chapter 2060. Yi Lianqiu wanted to say something, but she didn't have the chance. She sat in the same place and didn't move. She was thinking, was it right or wrong to agree to let Mu Yun go to the Tang family? Over the years, Mu Yun had lived a more difficult life than any other child. He had planned his life 10 years ahead of schedule. 10 years, he must have paid a great price. But now, except for Cher, who was a little bit of blood in his heart, he had become a cold-blooded businessman. Yi Lianqiu vaguely remembered that her son was only 20 years old. He should have been in love, but he had finished his career early and was ready to get married early. In Mumu's room, the two girls, who were 4 years apart, were like peers. They lay on the bed together and talked about their thoughts. Mumu and Cher didn't hang out often, but they hit it off. Probably because Cher was tight-lipped, Qin Mu would usually tell her about her thoughts. In Qin Mu's heart, she had already regarded Cher as her sister-in-law. The 14-year-old Qin Mu tilted her head and looked at the 18-year-old Cher with a hint of joy in her cold eyes. "Cher, I have someone I like." Cher held the comic book and couldn't help laughing. "How old are you? You already have someone you like." Qin Mu glanced at her and said, "Let me tell you, when you were 4 years old, you were kissed by my brother, and it was the kind of kiss that forced you against the wall." At such a young age, Qin Mu already knew everything. She only dared to say it in front of Cher. "You've met the wrong person." Snow spat out softly as she deflected the attack with ease. However, Qin Mu smiled and said, "I can see that you like your brother." "Bah, bah, bah. I don't like him." Cher stuck out her tongue and made a face at Qin Mu. Qin Mu still looked gentle and asked, "Don't you think I'm good-looking?" It wasn't that she was confident. Her brother's looks were unparalleled among the younger generation in B City. However, he was usually too cold, so girls didn't like him. No, it was that no girls dared to approach him. No one wanted to be frozen, right? Snow's mind raced for a moment, and then she smiled contentedly. "But the person I saw was also good-looking." A faint smile appeared on Qin Mu's face. "He can play the piano, sitting in the sun, quiet and beautiful." As Qin Mu spoke, her face glowed faintly, and her whole body lit up. Cher frowned. "Where did you see it?" Qin Mu blinked. "It's a secret. But I can take you to see him." Cher was a little surprised. "You're in love." Qin Mu reached out and pinched Cher's face. "You got engaged at the age of 18, and you're talking to me about being in love." She looked at Cher with the same expression as Yi Muyun. Cher was in a trance for a moment. After a long time, she shook her head. "All right, I'll go with you." Qin Mu was always a young girl who had to find someone to share everything with. But this time, she found the wrong person. Cher chatted with her until 11 p.m. before returning to her room. Because they were about to get engaged, everyone in the Qin family was clear about Yi Muyun's feelings, so they didn't deliberately sleep in separate rooms. The two of them slept together if they wanted to. After all, they had slept together since they were young. And Yi Lianqiu really wasn't sure if Cher still had her virginity. Chapter 2061. Seeing her come in, Yi Muyun reached out to her. "Why did you talk for so long?" Shua rolled into his arms, hugged his waist, buried her little face in his chest, and smelled his pleasant scent. "I chatted with Mumu for a while longer." She buried her face and suddenly asked softly, "Brother, do you object to puppy love?" Yi Muyun wasn't on guard at all. He reached out to stroke her long hair and smiled faintly. "You've been with me since you were 10 years old." She propped up her body in his arms and bit her lip. "I mean, what if it's Momo and Mumu?" Yi Muyun couldn't help laughing. "Them? They can't be. How old are they?" "You just said that I've been with you since I was 10 years old." Cher bit his waist. Such an intimate action probably pleased him. He smiled and rubbed her little head. "How can we be the same?" At this moment, he felt very gentle as he said such words. He leaned over and kissed her again. His voice was low and somewhat seductive. "Baby, do you want to not wait for the engagement?" She understood what he meant in a moment. She buried her little face in his arms and bit him. "Scoundrel." Then she hugged his waist and didn't let him act rashly. He was an adult man who often slept with her, so he naturally had needs in that aspect. At this moment, their relationship was intimate, and the little girl was so soft in his arms. In fact, he wanted to make an exception. Moreover, he was a man, and this was his childhood bedroom. It would be more satisfying to have her here. But what could he do? His little girl wasn't willing, so he had to endure it no matter how much he wanted to. It was mainly because she was too young, and he had some barriers in his heart. However, he didn't let her go. 5 minutes later, the little girl was lying on the bed. He had taken quite a bit of advantage of her, and in the end, she cried out for her big brother. Her cries made his heart go numb, and he felt that this was the most beautiful thing in the world. Cher was very tired of being tortured by him. Before falling asleep, she hesitated to say what she wanted to say again and again, but she still couldn't say it. When she woke up early in the morning, Yi Muyun had already gotten up. She was lying on the bed alone, looking around at the empty surroundings. At this time, Chinmu came out of nowhere and sat by Cher's bed. "I'll take you out of the Yun Nation to pick up the items for the engagement. I'll come to pick you up at night." Cher propped herself up, her eyes sparkling. "What about you? Today is Saturday." Chinmu blinked and said with a mischievous look, "We can play for the whole day." Cher didn't have any friends, but she had a good relationship with Mumu, who was 4 years younger than her, so she readily agreed. Suddenly, Chinmu bit his ear and said softly, "I'll bring you somewhere in the afternoon, but you have to get rid of my mom first." Cher immediately understood and made an okay gesture. The two girls looked at each other and smiled. At this time, Cher was looking forward to it. After all, having a little secret was a very exciting thing for a girl. After breakfast, Yi Liangqiu took Shui to pick out the Qin family's heirlooms. They were passed down to her by Madame Qin, and since Shui was the daughter-in-law of the Qin family, it was only right that they belonged to her. Chapter 2062. Yi Liangqiu sighed, picked out some for her, and put them in a jewelry box. Cher didn't care about this and just happily got into the car with Chinmu. The two little girls leaned close and talked excitedly. The mother shook her head again. Cher was still a little girl. She really didn't know why her son was willing to do this. He looked about the same age as Mumu. Yi Liangqiu drove her own car and took her little daughter and wife to the largest shopping mall in City B. She personally picked out a pair of dragon and phoenix gold bracelets designed by a famous designer, which were as thick as an arm, for Cher. Chinmu and Cher kept laughing, especially Cher, who didn't look like she was going to get engaged at all. Yi Liangqiu shook her head as she picked out the things. But as long as Mu Yun liked it, it didn't matter. What Yi Liangqiu bought were all simple and unadorned items. She probably hoped from the bottom of her heart that she could use these items to make her son's marriage happy. She thought self-deprecatingly that Mu Yun was going to get engaged, so she was now directly an elder. After picking out the things, the two little ones only wanted to go out to eat dessert. Unlike Yi Muyun, Yi Liangqiu was still willing to give the children freedom. After thinking for a while, she agreed. Besides, she had to ask the driver to move these things to the car. After escaping from the adults, the two little ones were very happy. They went to the dessert shop and ate a week's worth of desserts. Finally, they touched their little bellies and left in satisfaction. It was lunchtime when they left the dessert shop. Cher followed Mumu and asked, "Where are we going?" Qin Mu turned around and smiled. "Don't you want to see it? I'll take you to see the top piano performance." Cher immediately understood and smiled. "So fast." "Oh, I'll tell your brother later." Qin Mu stuck out her tongue. "Don't tell my brother." Cher chuckled. "Will your brother think that all the men in the world are not worthy of you?" Mumu winked at her. "You know." The two little ones entered the restaurant. Because Qin Mu was tall, no one suspected that she was only 14 years old. Coupled with her outstanding temperament, it was easy for her to get an excellent seat. Qin Mu ordered the dishes skillfully. Her fluent French made Cher feel ashamed. "That's all." Qin Mu closed the menu and smiled. "By the way, hasn't your pianist come today?" The waiter looked at the time. 10 more minutes. Many of the female customers in this restaurant came from Mr. Zhou. Mr. Zhou had been playing here for 3 years, but the youngest and most distinguished customer was the little girl in front of him. Qin Mu nodded. "Okay, thank you." After the waiter left, Cher looked at the empty piano and whispered, "Mumu, you look like a rich woman who is going to adopt a gigolo." There was a dreamy look in Qin Mu's eyes. "You don't know, he looks like the sunshine in winter." She paused for a moment. "I want to marry him in the future." Cher stammered, "Isn't it too soon?" Qin Mu looked at the figure at the door of the restaurant and smiled. "Cher, do you know that sometimes you can tell at a glance that the person is the one you are waiting for?" Cher followed her gaze and looked over. Then, all the blood in her body almost froze. It was Zhou Chongwang who came in. Chapter 2063. Qin Mu was fascinated. Xue Er's head was a little stiff as she looked at her. She asked seriously, "Qin Mu, your feelings for him are only one-sided, right?" Qin Mu had a dreamy look on her face. "No, we're together." "They're together." These 4 words boomed in Cher's ears like thunder. She suddenly held Qin Mu's hand tightly, and her voice was tense and trembling. "Is that what you mean?" Qin Mu nodded. "Yes. And I took the initiative." Cher's body suddenly fell against the back of the chair behind her. She could hardly believe that Qin Mu would be so bold. She was only 14 years old. And what was Zhou Chongwang's motive for accepting this relationship? Cher pursed her lips and closed her eyes slightly. "You can't be with him." Qin Mu, on the other hand, had a cheerful expression. "Why? How could Xue Er tell Qin Mu about those hidden secrets in darkness?" At this time, she suffered the greatest shock in her life. Maybe she was wrong. She was wrong about Zhou Chongwang. She raised her eyes slightly and looked at the side of Zhou Chongwang's face. At this time, as if he had sensed it, he turned his head and looked at her. With just one glance, she knew that he had everything under control. He had deliberately approached Mumu, and his purpose was obvious. Cher's heart was complicated. She almost didn't dare to face Qin Mu, let alone Yi Muyun. She even thought that if she had bought Rongguang quickly, Zhou Chongwang might not have had the time and energy to seduce Qin Mu. It was she who gave Zhou Chongguang a chance to take a breather. At the critical moment, she always stands on the side of Yi family. But Zhou Chongguang is in a new period of mourning. What kind of mood does he have to seduce Qin Mu? Her heart was burning with anger, but she could only endure it. She could only watch as Zhou Chongguang finished playing a song and walked straight towards her. Zhou Chongguang. Qin Mu generously called his name. She held his arm and introduced him to Cher. This is my sister-in-law, Tang Cher. Looking at their intimate appearance, Cher was angry in her heart, but she didn't show it in front of her. She just said softly, Mumu likes to draw, play the piano, and arrange flowers. She doesn't know much about business, so she probably doesn't know that Mr. Zhou is the heir of glory, right? Cher, you know him. Qin Mu was surprised. Yes, he's an alumnus. Cher nodded. Zhou Chongguang is very famous in the school. Qin Mu was slightly surprised. Really? Zhou Chongguang remained calm. He held Qin Mu's hand and slowly sat down. It's a coincidence. Qin Mu had always been quiet, but at this time, her eyes were shining when she looked at Zhou Chongguang, as if there was a small universe in love. Snow closed her eyes. Her entire body felt weak and powerless. She suddenly stood up and squeezed out a smile. I'm going to the bathroom. Qin Mu didn't doubt it. Then come here quickly. The dishes will be served in a while. Cher forced a smile. When she left her seat and turned around, she took a deep breath. She felt that all the blood in her body had been sucked out. Walking to the bathroom, she kept washing her face with cold water to calm herself down. She couldn't panic. She couldn't be sure how far Qin Mu and Zhou Chongguang had gone. In the mirror, a tall figure suddenly appeared. It was Zhou Chongguang. Cher's eyes met his in the mirror. Chapter 2064. Cher didn't say anything but just stared at him fiercely. On the day my father died, the day Glory Light was on the verge of bankruptcy. There was no expression on Zhou Chongguang's clean face. On that day, I had her. Zhou Chongguang, aren't you afraid of retribution? Mumu is innocent. Cher's voice was extremely hoarse. Zhou Chongguang smiled and said, What about me? What about my father and all the employees of Glory Light? What did they do wrong? Cher growled angrily, so you blame Mumu for all this? She's only 14 years old. No. I'll marry her. Zhou Chongguang slowly approached her, almost trapping her in front of him and the sink. She's very happy now. As long as this lie is never exposed, she will feel that she will be very happy as Zhou Chongguang's wife. His face was as clean as ever, but there seemed to be a pair of black wings growing out of his white shirt. Snow still found it hard to accept. The huge change had shaken her to the point that she was in a mess. After a long time, she said coldly, Do you think you can marry Mumu just because you want to? Yes. Zhou Chongguang's lips were close to her ear. But you don't know that she has a history of depression at such a young age. If I tell her everything, she will say that I'm a liar and that I like her sister-in-law. How big a blow do you think it will be to her? He almost whispered the last sentence against her lips. Do you think she'll have a relapse? With a loud slap, Schwarber's palm landed on his handsome face. She did not hesitate in the slightest, nor did she conserve her strength. Cher was so angry that her whole body was trembling. Did you investigate her? Yes. Zhou Chongguang's voice was very soft. When I was cornered by Yi Muyun, I was thinking that using any means necessary was the only way to save Rongguang and myself. Unfortunately, my father couldn't see it. Cher closes her eyes. I can persuade him to give up his glory. Let Mumu go. No matter what price she had to pay, even if she had to give all her shares to Yi Muyun, she would get Mumu back at this time. She knew very well that what she wanted to get back was the relationship between her and Yi Muyun. She thought that she was still selfish and let Mumu down by making such a decision. Zhou Chongguang laughed softly and said mockingly, "Now I feel that there are too many benefits to being the son-in-law of the Qin family. For example, we will still be a family in the future." Snow was utterly disgusted by the sight. He threw out his final trump card. "Think about it. Every time you see me, every time you see Qin Mu, do you feel guilty? Do you feel like you've let her down? Because..." He spat out a few words. "The one I like is you." Cher slapped him again. "Zhou Chongguang, you're crazy." "Yes, I'm crazy, but Yi Muyun forced me to do all this." Zhou Chongguang smiled coldly. "No, I'll attend your engagement ceremony with Yi Muyun on time, sister-in-law." After that, he stepped back and left without looking back. Snow, on the other hand, looked as if all the energy had been sucked out of her. She couldn't say a single word. She leaned against the wall and reached out to support herself so that she wouldn't slip. She knew that Zhou Chongguang was serious. Chapter 2065. Zhou Chongguang was like a blackened angel. Cher closed her eyes gently. Sure enough, behind every clean person, there was a dark side. Zhou Chongguang returned to his seat, and Qin Mu looked up gently. "Did you see Cher in the bathroom?" "No." Zhou Chongguang was very considerate as he served her. His breezy smile made people feel very comfortable. At least for Qin Mu, it was comfortable. After a while, Cher returned to her seat. Qin Mu looked worried. "What's wrong with Cher? Why do you look so pale?" "Maybe I didn't sleep well last night." Cher's voice was a little weak. "I'm not used to bed." "Oh," Qin Mu said and didn't say anything else. Under normal circumstances, she was a quiet girl. Zhou Chongguang and Cher were talking very calmly. Neither of them showed any clues until Zhou Chongguang went on the stage again. Cher looked at Qin Mu and asked slowly, "Which step do you think it has reached? Must it be him?" She knew that Qin Mu had a history of depression. She had even tried to commit suicide. No one could figure out why a 10-year-old girl would have such an illness. Later, Qin Mu was pampered. She did whatever she liked. If she liked to draw, she would draw. If she liked to arrange flowers, she would arrange flowers. If she liked to learn the piano, she would learn it. Fortunately, she was good at all of these and was very talented, but she was not proficient in any of them. Everyone outside thought that Tang Shui was the most pampered one in the Qin and Tang family. In reality, the one who was pampered was Qin Mu, who was the silent one. She also knew that she saw a lot of blood that time. After that, she couldn't sleep for a few days. As soon as she closed her eyes, she felt that Mumu was going to leave her. Perhaps from then on, her relationship with Qin Mu became especially good, and Qin Mu also matured early. Cher clearly knew that no one dared to oppose Qin Mu's proposal to be with Zhou Chongguang, because Zhou Chongguang was right, no one dared to provoke Qin Mu. Hearing her question, Qin Mu smiled faintly and nodded. Then, she looked at Zhou Chongguang attentively. Cher looked at her smile. After a long time, she asked softly, "Mumu, do you like him very much?" Qin Mu nodded again and then turned to look at her. Her voice was a little sweet. "Do you think he's good too?" Snow's heart was in a mess as she nodded. After the meal, she left with Qin Mu. She told Qin Mu that girls should be more reserved. Qin Mu left with her, but on the way, she sent several messages to Zhou Chongguang. Cher looked at them and didn't say anything. She thought of Gu Mei. Gu Mei was still waiting for Zhou Chongguang inside, but Zhou Chongguang had already chosen Qin Mu. In other words, he had betrayed Gu Mei's sacrifice in spirit. After sending Qin Mu back, it was already 2:00 in the afternoon. Suddenly, Cher wanted to see Gu Mei. She didn't wait for Yi Muyun. She stopped a taxi and called Gu Zhe to make arrangements. Of course, she told Yi Muyun not to know. Gu Zhe guessed that something had happened, but he didn't know what it was, so he had to do it for her. When Cher saw Gu Mei seemed to have known that she was coming. She said with a touch of self-mockery, "Are you here to tell me that he has successfully hooked up with Qin Mu? You already knew." Cher breathed painfully and looked at Gu Mei in disbelief. Chapter 2066. Cher's face was cold. After a long time, she asked softly, "Are you still going to be loyal to him?" Gu Mei smiled and tilted her head to look at Cher. "He likes you. It doesn't matter who he marries. Qin Mu can't control him." Cher squinted her eyes. "You mean you'll be the third wheel when you get out?" Gu Mei raised her index finger and shushed her. "Don't show your cards too early. You've already revealed too much of your plan. But I can understand. Zhou Chongguang and Qin Mu are together. If you marry into the Qin family, you can't watch it. What if Zhou Chongguang suddenly goes crazy and tells Qin Mu that he likes you? Do you think Qin Mu can still live?" Cher pursed her lips and didn't say anything. "You must regret it now, right?" Gu Mei chuckled. "But there's no medicine for regret in life." "Cher, I'm sorry." "You don't need to be sorry." Cher looked at Gu Mei coldly. "I'm not here to hear you apologize. I'm here to tell you that if you want to hurt Qin Mu, I'll make sure you can't get out of prison for the rest of your life. I can do what I say." Gu Mei was stunned. After a while, she asked softly, "Did Zhou Chongguang threaten you?" Gu Mei sneered. "He's a natural warrior. He can defeat you with one move. You don't dare to take the risk for Qin Mu, right?" Cher held her breath. After a long time, she said coldly, "It has nothing to do with you." She turned and left without hesitation. Gu Mei was behind her. "Tang Cher, is it because of Qin Mu or Yi Muyun that you made such a choice? You love him, don't you?" Snow's footsteps came to a halt. After a while, she turned and looked at Gu Mei. "You're right. I love him. I can wait." Cher smiled absent-mindedly. "I can wait until I can love him. Gu Mei, I wait because I know he loves me. I won't wait forever for a man who doesn't love me." She added, "If you sleep with Zhou Chongguang, Gu Zhe, your brother will take the punishment for you." Gu Mei chuckled, "You are wrong. You should let Zhou Chongguang make mistakes and let Qin Mu give up." Cher looked at her, lowered her eyes, and murmured, "I can't afford to gamble." As long as Qin Mu was fine, she and Yi Muyun would be fine. If one day, something happened to Qin Mu because of Zhou Chongguang, then she would be finished. She knew that at the crucial moment, she would always make the right choice, because right now, she had no other choice. Just like that, she walked out in a straight line. Gu Zhe was waiting for her at the door. She was not surprised. She walked to Gu Zhe and said in a low voice, "Gu Zhe, from now on, you have to cooperate with me." Gu Zhe squinted his eyes, and his heart was beating wildly. He heard Cher say slowly, "Zhou Chongguang seduced Qin Mu." Gu Zhe was shocked. As Yi Muyun's confidant, he knew a little about the Qin family. Now, Zhou Chongguang had really hit Mr. Ye's weak spot. Needless to say, Mr. Yi would give in. No matter how harsh the conditions were, Mr. Yi would agree. Guzay was even more shocked. What about Cher and Mr. Yi? Chapter 2067. Guzay looked at Cher and didn't say anything for a long time. Cher smiled faintly and said in a quiet voice, "Let's leave it at that. Don't let brother know about what happened today." Guzay was a little shocked and wanted to say something, but stopped himself. "I'll find a chance to tell him." Cher pursed her lips. Guzay didn't say anything else and walked downstairs with her in silence. When they got into the car, Guzay said calmly, "What's wrong with them?" Cher tilted her head to look at Guzay and smiled. "Perhaps it's because they've experienced darkness before, so they're desperately trying to grab onto that ray of sunshine. But they've never thought that Zhou Chongguang is the greatest darkness." She leaned her head against the car window and said tiredly, "We're always the first to go overboard." When Guzay heard this, he knew that she was completely on Mr. Ye's side. But the more she stood on Mr. Ye's side, the more vulnerable she was. The two of them didn't speak along the way. He sent her all the way to Pei Garden. At this time, Yi Muyun hadn't returned yet. This was also the time that Guzay had calculated. Guzay left quickly and Cher walked upstairs slowly. She fell on the bed and didn't want to get up. She needed to think about it. Downstairs, Sister Li looked worried. She thought that the young couple had quarreled again and that Miss didn't look happy. So when Yi Muyun came back, Sister Li nagged again, "Go upstairs and coax him." Yi Muyun looked upstairs. "What's wrong? He looks a little absent-minded." Sister Li sighed. "Hurry up and go up to take a look. Don't throw a tantrum again." Sister Li secretly thought that young master would have to work harder in the future if he married a baby like Mississippi. Just as she was thinking about it, Yi Muyun had already walked upstairs to his bedroom, but there was no one there. After thinking for a while, he went to Cher's bedroom. She was lying down with a pillow covering her face. Yi Muyun smiled helplessly and pulled the pillow away from her face. "Aren't you afraid of suffocating?" Cher looked at him pitifully, then threw her little body into his embrace. "Brother." She softly called his name and rubbed against his chest like a little animal. He couldn't resist that kind of warmth. His heart was full, and his voice was slightly hoarse. "What's wrong?" No. I just want to hug you." She lifted her little face and kissed his chin carelessly, then slowly moved to his lips. She had never been so proactive before, pestering him to the point where his soul almost left his body. Sister Li was wrong. She wasn't throwing a tantrum. She was simply missing him. This kiss was getting hotter and hotter, and Yi Muyun couldn't resist it. The young man's forehead was soon covered in sweat. He took off the little body in his arms and said in a warm voice, "Cher." He forced himself to calm down because he wanted to stay until the engagement night. He wasn't a saint, and he couldn't wait until the wedding night. However, there were still a few days before the engagement, and he wanted to wait. But there was a ball of fire in his arms, and she kept pressing against him. Slowly, his breathing became erratic. He pressed his hands on her shoulders and said in a warm voice, "Cher, are you sure?" His little one was full of blood. She nodded vigorously and then buried herself in his arms. Yi Muyun let out a deep breath and looked around. In the end, he still picked her up and walked to his bedroom. Chapter 2068. Cher clutched his shoulders, feeling extremely nervous. She pursed her lips and said, "Brother, I'm scared." He lowered his head and kissed her on the lips. "Cher, it's me. I'm the one who wants you." He kicked open the bedroom door roughly and kicked it again. The sound reverberated through the room. Sister Li, who was downstairs, felt her heart skip a beat. She wondered if something had happened and wondered if she should go up to take a look. Upstairs, in the bedroom that was filled with a masculine scent, Yi Muyun was experiencing the biggest surprise of his life. Even though he had some understanding of this kind of thing, even though he had watched the films countless times, he only knew the essence of it at that moment. The little thing in his arms was a pure little vixen who had come to seduce him. He indulged himself in it and tried his best to give her the best. However, it was their first time, and the scene was not pleasant at all. The little girl hammered his shoulders, tears welling up in her eyes. "Do you know how to do it?" He kissed her and coaxed her. "Bear with it for a while longer." Fortunately, he was a smart person and soon learned to draw inferences. Soon, the sounds in the bedroom became warm and lingered for a long time. Auntie Lee waited downstairs for a long time, but she didn't see anyone. She felt strange and decided to go upstairs to take a look. In the end, when she reached the young master's bedroom, she heard strange noises. Sister Lee was an experienced person. How could she not know what those sounds were? She blushed and did not know what to say. She paused for a while and eventually went downstairs. She stared at the table of dishes in a daze. Then she thought to herself that it was time to prepare supper. The two little ones probably would not come down for a while. As a young man who had just experienced the world, he could not stop for a while. Moreover, the little thing in his arms was begging him again and again. How could he stop? From 6 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. he did not let go of her and kept coming. Finally, when he was exhausted, he held her in his arms and kissed the beads of sweat on her forehead. He asked lovingly, "Are you all right?" The little person was still trembling in his arms, unable to say a word. He was somewhat satisfied and kissed her again. "Does it still hurt?" Cher lay in his arms, feeling a little shy. She didn't make a sound and just bit his shoulder. "It's okay." He narrowed his eyes and chuckled after a long time. "It doesn't hurt. Let's do it again." She was so flustered that she immediately hugged his body and begged him not to. Actually, he was also a little exhausted. It was also his first time, so he didn't know what to do. He only got the feeling towards the end. Just like that, he held her in his arms for a while until the sweat had cooled down. Then, he carried her to the bathroom for a hot bath. When he was wiping her down, Cher's little face turned to the side. "Be gentler." His gaze was deep and his movements were careless. For the first time, the two of them were a little awkward. They didn't even dare to make eye contact, afraid that they would recall the passionate scene just now. After settling her down and wrapping her in the bathrobe, he pinched her little face and smiled. "I'll go downstairs to get some food." Cher replied and watched him go downstairs. At this moment, the entire villa was quiet. Yi Muyun walked up the stairs in a relaxed mood. His heart was filled with an indescribable sense of contentment. Although it was not planned, tonight was undoubtedly wonderful. Chapter 2069. He walked into the kitchen. The supper prepared by Sister Lee was still hot. In addition to the usual supper, there were also 2 bowls of tonic soup. Yi Muyun shook his head and smiled, but he still took it upstairs. Pushing open the bedroom door, he saw Cher lying on the bed with her eyes closed. She seemed to be asleep. Her little face was blushing, and her long eyelashes were curled up with 2 drops of tears, which made her look weak and beautiful. The young man who had just tasted her sweetness was naturally filled with tenderness. He put the supper aside, held her soft little body in his arms, and kissed her lips lightly. Cher woke up soon. She blinked and looked at him, and then her face became redder. She called him brother softly. "Eat something," he said hoarsely. He felt that she was already his little wife, and that feeling was very subtle. It was different to have had it before. Cher nestled in his arms obediently. Looking at the soup in front of her, she frowned and asked, "What is this?" Yimuyun's voice carried a hint of a smile. "This is the tonic soup Auntie Lee made for us." As soon as he said that, the little girl buried herself in his arms and said shyly, "Did Sister Lee know?" He seemed to know what she was thinking and teased her in her ear, "Baby, if you keep your voice down, probably no one will know." Cher was not convinced. She stared at him, but her voice was lingering. "It's obviously your voice." She thought of the sound he made when he was aroused and immediately covered her face. She never knew that a man's voice sounded better than a woman's. Cher buried herself in his arms and refused to get up. He smiled and pulled her out. "What's so embarrassing about it? It's natural for a man and a woman to have sex. But we're not married yet." She bit her lip, put her sharp chin on his shoulder, and looked at him blankly. Tonight, she didn't know why she wanted him so much and wanted him to hug her. They had sex naturally, and she didn't regret it. She didn't know when it started, but she was sure that in this life, she would only be with him. After having each other, she felt very good. He hugged her quietly and said in a hoarse voice, "Good girl, get up and eat something." She didn't say anything. He smiled bitterly and pinched her little ear. "Baby, I'm exhausted." Cher got up with a red face and hugged his neck with one hand. "You eat it then." Finally, there was a bowl of seafood porridge for the two to share. There was nothing better than a young couple. He hugged her, and neither of them felt sleepy. They hugged each other until it was almost 1 in the morning before they fell asleep. He woke up early, around 6 in the morning. After that, he pressed down on her again without any restraint. In the end, Cher gently closed her eyes and bit her lip. "You're shameless." Yimuyun didn't care about his face anymore. He forced her to come. It was 9 o'clock in the morning, long past the time he went to the company. This was the first time for Mr. Yi. Guzei's phone calls came one after the other, and he didn't stop. When he was satisfied, he finally let go of her. However, he didn't control himself, and Cher was a little hurt. The young man who had sex for the first time went to the pharmacy again and bought an ointment. He came back and personally applied it on her. He didn't leave and stayed with her the whole morning. Chapter 2070. On the other side, Guzei was holding his phone, extremely surprised. CEO Yi had always been unstoppable, rain or shine. However, he was a man after all, and he could quickly figure out the reason behind it. He shook his head and sighed. He had a feeling that this was the calm before the storm. Or rather, Cher was afraid of losing him, so she gave herself to Yimuyun. On the other side, Yimuyun hung up the phone and kissed the little girl contentedly before walking downstairs. Auntie Lee's face was full of joy, and the other servants also had smiles on their faces. Pei Yuan already had a tacit understanding about what happened last night. At this moment, it felt like the whole world was celebrating. Yimuyun went downstairs to get the newspaper and went upstairs again. Snow was still asleep. She was sleeping soundly, and she seemed to be in perfect health. His fingers gently stroked her little face, and he couldn't bear to let go of her. She seemed to be conscious, and she rubbed her little face against his palm. Yimuyun's heart moved, and he whispered in her ear, "Cher, let's be together for the rest of our lives, okay?" The next life was too far away, and no one knew if it would happen, so he only wanted her to be by his side in this life. The little girl rubbed against him again. She didn't answer, but her actions were very warm. He chuckled deeply and habitually read through the newspaper once. Then he leaned against the headboard and used his phone to deal with work. He had never been so lazy before, but when he was with her, he felt that it was peaceful and beautiful. Cher didn't wake up until 4 in the afternoon. She had just opened her eyes when she was bitten on her cheek, accompanied by a man's hoarse voice. "You're awake." Yi Muyun pressed his forehead against hers and said lovingly, "Sleepy little pig." Cher looked at him for a long time before she said, "How long have I been asleep?" She sat up and looked at the sky outside. The sun was shining brightly. "It's 4 o'clock, he said softly, reaching out to stroke her long hair. "Do you want to take a walk in the garden?" Cher's face was a little pale. She slowly sat up straight and looked up at him. "I want to go out for dinner." After what happened last night, even if she asked him for the moon in the sky, he would probably agree, let alone a meal. Cher lowered her eyes. "The one Moo took me to yesterday was pretty good." "She's so small, yet you're still following behind her. Let's see how good you are." His words were full of resentment towards iron for not becoming steel. Cher glared at him before getting up and bouncing towards the bathroom. However, she had been injured before, and the moment she bounced, she pulled a little and her face was bitter. He smiled and carried her into the bathroom. He patted her head comfortingly. "Call me when you're done. I won't let you walk today." She blushed and quickly brushed her teeth to hide it. He smiled and leaned against the side, waiting for her. After dawdling for 2 hours, Yi Muyun finally went out with his little yellow bun. The family was led by Sisterly, and they all smiled and said that it didn't matter if they didn't come back. "The old people in the family are so open-minded now," Cher said in a low voice as she fastened her seatbelt. Yi Muyun chuckled and said, "They're not as open-minded as the little yellow bun at home." Cher's eyes widened. Was he talking about her? She snorted and said, "No, you can't help yourself." Chapter 2071. When they arrived at the restaurant that Qin Mu had gone to, the lights were on, and the street was full of neon lights. Cher got out of the car and looked at them greedily. She held Yi Muyun's arm with her little arm and leaned her face on his shoulder. "The moon is beautiful tonight." He looked down at her. "It seems that there is no moon tonight." The little girl was stunned and glared at him. Yi Muyun smiled, held her hand, and slowly walked into the restaurant. She followed behind him, her heart beating faster. Yes, she wanted him to see everything. She wouldn't hide it from him. She wanted him to handle things that she couldn't handle. Cher thought that she really didn't know what to do. And she knew that he wouldn't hurt Mumu. If she told Auntie Yi and Uncle Qin about this, they would be too sad. She still had this feeling. Sure enough, Qin Mu was inside, holding her little chin and watching Zhou Chongwang's performance with a faint smile on her face. "Mumu is here today. Have you made an appointment?" Yi Muyun raised his eyebrows, looked at the little girl, and asked in a low voice. Cher shook her head. "No. It should be Mumu who comes every day." As she spoke, she sighed softly and closed her eyes again. Qin Mu didn't notice their existence. Yi Muyun was about to go over, but Cher stopped him and said softly, "She has an appointment with a friend." Yi Muyun narrowed his eyes and looked at her with a strange expression. The waiter arranged for them to sit down, but no one was in the mood to order. Their eyes were fixed on Qin Mu's table. After a while, Yi Muyun's eyes stopped because he saw Zhou Chongwang. Zhou Chongwang walked to Qin Mu's side and naturally lowered his head to kiss her. Qin Mu looked up and smiled. Her eyes were bright, as if there were countless little stars hidden in them. Yi Muyun recognized that kind of gaze. His little Shui would sometimes look at him like that. In other words, Qin Mu was now with Zhou Chongwang. Just as he was about to stand up, Cher held his hand. "Mu Yun, don't go." He calmed down and looked at her. She called him Mu Yun just now. She must have known about Qin Mu long ago. "When did you know?" he asked in a low, husky voice. Cher pursed her lips. Yesterday. Afraid that he would act rashly, she pressed his hand down forcefully. Let's talk somewhere else. Yi Muyun was naturally unwilling, and his voice became even more hoarse. You spent so much effort just to bring me to see this scene. He was a little embarrassed because Mumu was only 14 years old. Cher lowered her eyes, but her voice was a little choked. I'm sorry. I don't know what to do. That night, Mumu told me that she had someone she liked. I didn't expect that person to be Zhou Chongguang. She raised her eyes, and there were some tears in them. I beg you, don't be impulsive. Mumu can't stand the stimulation. Zhou Chongguang knew Qin Mu's illness better than Cher. After hearing her words, he slowly calmed down and said in a cold voice, Leave this matter to me, okay? Cher looked at him and was unwilling to let go of his hand. Don't you blame me. Yi Muyun thought of her abnormal behavior last night and how frightened she was at this time. He closed his eyes and said, No. He got up and carried her out of the restaurant. Neither of them was in the mood to eat, so they found a health tea house. They sat face to face, and he had been waiting for her to speak. Chapter 2072. Yi Muyun looked at her without any expression on his face. In just a moment, he was shocked. He held Cher's hand with his fingers, which made her feel extreme pain, but she didn't say a word and let him hold it. After a long time, a murderous look appeared on Yi Muyun's face. Cher walked over, hugged him from behind, and buried her face in the back of his neck. Cher, did you pity me last night? His voice was low. Snow shook her head behind his back. Her voice was soft as she said, No, no. She tightened her little arms and murmured, That's because I want to be with you. Or it could be said that Qin Mu's matter had hit her too hard. She was the same as him. Mumu was his sister and also her sister. In addition, this person was Zhou Chongguang, so she had no reason not to worry. As they hugged each other like this, Yi Muyun calmed down. Naturally, he had already thought of 100 ways to kill Zhou Chongguang. But Cher hugged him and said in a low voice, Think about Mumu. Can Mumu withstand such a blow? He didn't say it, but she already knew that he couldn't tolerate Zhou Chongguang, and he must have used some underhanded means. Cher didn't care about these at this time. She only cared about Qin Mu. Muyun. I'm not helping Zhou Chongguang. He can't die. She made it very clear. You can't take the risk. Yi Muyun's voice had never been so helpless and fragile. He let her hug him. How many times had he been her reliance, and how many times had he used all kinds of force on her? But at this time, they were equal, and he needed her comfort. Muyun, talk to him and see what he wants. Cher put her face against his cheek. I don't agree with Mumu being with him either. If Zhou Chongguang was sincere, then no one would have any reason to object. But now, no one could hand Mumu over to him. Yi Muyun listened to her words, reached out and hugged her. After a while, he said softly, Okay, I will talk to him. At this moment, he had already given up on acquiring glory. Now, Zhou Chongguang had indeed won. No one dared to joke about Mumu's life. Cher nodded. She gestured for a waiter and ordered 2 servings of nutritious meals, the kind that were quite healthy. Yi Muyun reached out and ruffled her hair. His tone was indifferent as he said, My little milkshake is sensible now. In the past, she would have protested, but not today. She kept hugging him. After a long time, Yi Muyun burst into laughter. Cher, I'm not that fragile. Hurry up and eat. Oh, she replied and sat down to eat quietly. The atmosphere was quite heavy. After dinner, he sent her back first and drove back himself. He was always worried about Mumu, who was his sister. The restaurant closed at 10 o'clock, but Qin Mu stayed there until 10 o'clock. Yi Muyun was annoyed when he saw that. No wonder Mumu's cram school was very late. It turned out that he had come here. Then Qin Mo was an accomplice. However, no matter how angry he was, he had to endure it and watch Qin Mu get into Zhou Chongwang's car. He followed them all the way. Fortunately, Zhou Chongwang sent Mumu directly to the gate of the Qin's mansion, which meant that he did not want to avoid trouble. Yi Muyun parked his car a little far away. After watching Qin Mu get out of the car and walk into the Qin's mansion, he opened the door and got out. He waved his fist at Zhou Chongwang. Bastard!
Chapter 2073. In the dark night, Zhou Chongwang let out a slightly evil smile. Mr. Yi also stalks people. His tone was indifferent as he wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. Yi Muyun's fingers clenched into a fist as he restrained himself from making a move. He leaned against the front of his sports car and looked at Zhou Chongwang. What do I have to do for you to leave Qin Mu? Zhou Chongwang slowly wiped the corner of his mouth, a faint smile on his face. Mr. Yi is still so high and mighty. I don't like to beat around the bush. I can stop buying Rongguang and I can even make Rongguang better than before. Yi Muyun narrowed his eyes at Zhou Chongwang. Leave Qin Mu and I'll send her overseas. He had already thought it through. He didn't have anyone he could trust except Cher. At this moment, in his heart, Cher wasn't a mischievous child, but a little wife who could help him. Zhou Chongwang sneered. What about my father? Can Mr. Yi bring him back to life? In the dark night, his handsome face was tainted with evil. He died of a heart attack. Yes, his psychological endurance was too weak. He wasn't a match for Mr. Yi, who was 30 years younger than him. But his life was gone just like that. Mr. Yi, if it were you, would you let him off easily? Yi Muyun narrowed his eyes even more. Then what do you want? Mr. Yi owns 40% of King Entertainment's shares. Zhou Chongwang smiled. I wonder if in Mr. Ye's heart, is Qin Mu worth that price? Impossible. Yi Muyun's voice was tense. Zhou Chongwang, give up on that idea. Of course, Mr. Yi has another choice. Zhou Chongwang smiled. Give me your fiancée. I'll take her abroad and never come back. He added, as for Boyd, I'm not interested. I've already taken away Mr. Ye's most precious thing. Zhou Chongwang's every word was like a knife, and each knife was fatal. He was using the thing that Yi Muyun cared about the most to make a deal. Yi Muyun narrowed his eyes, his voice as cold as ice. You know I can make you disappear at any time. Zhou Chongwang looked at him and smiled faintly. Mr. Yi can give it a try. As he spoke, he opened the car door and drove away. Yi Muyun didn't stop him. He listened to Cher's words. At this moment, he really couldn't act rashly, even though he really wanted to kill Zhou Chongwang right now. And now, he was in a dilemma. Should he tell his parents about this? He got into the car and drove into the Qin residence. Yi Liangxiu and Qin Anlin were a little surprised. Qin Mu and Qin Mo were eating supper. Yi Muyun glared at little Qin Mo. Qin Mo was a little confused. He didn't know how he had offended his brother. Why are you back so late? Yi Liangxiu asked curiously. Yi Muyun smiled and sat next to Qin Mu. He reached out and ruffled Qin Mu's hair. I just happened to pass by. Where's Cher? She didn't come with you? Yi Liangxiu asked. She had already gone to instruct the servants to make supper for the young master.
Yi Muyun was a little silent as he ate. No one knew a son better than a mother. When Yi Liangxiu saw his abnormal behavior, he could roughly guess that he had something on his mind. He thought that he was at odds with Shua Air and wanted to say a few words to console him, but he didn't expect that to be the case. Chapter 2074. Yi Muyun quietly finished his supper and watched the two little ones go upstairs to sleep. He and Mr. and Mrs. Chin were still sitting on the sofa downstairs. After the servant served them tea, they left. "What's wrong? It's rare for you to look so uneasy," Yi Liangqiu said with concern. "Cher is still young. Try to coax her more." Yi Muyun shook his head. "Mom, it's not about Cher." Yi Liangqiu found it strange. If it wasn't about Cher, why was her son so worried? She looked at Qin Anlin and smiled. Did our son meet another Cher Zhang or Cher Wang? That's troublesome. Qin Anlin also smiled. After a while, he stopped joking. "Muyun, if you have something to say, just say it." Yi Muyun looked at his parents, took out a cigarette from his pocket, lit it, and took a puff. Mr. and Mrs. Chin looked at each other and knew that it was a big deal. Their son never smoked at home. "Mom, Dad, Mumu is with Zhou Chongwang." Yi Muyun tried his best to speak of this matter in a calm tone, but when he spoke of the specifics, his fingers that were holding the cigarette trembled slightly. Qin Anlin and Yi Liangqiu were both stunned. Qin Mu had always been very obedient. Except for her illness, she had always been worry-free. Now she was in love. Of all people, she was with Zhou Chongwang. His father immediately gritted his teeth. It was Zhou Chongwang who seduced Mumu, wasn't it? Yi Liangqiu looked at Yi Muyun. He did not deny it. The three of them were silent. No one saw Qin Mu, who was standing at the staircase on the second floor. She was listening quietly, and there was a hint of contemplation on her face. The matter was put on hold because no one dared to take the risk. When Yi Muyun returned to Pei Garden, it was already late at night. He slowly walked upstairs. Cher had already fallen asleep, but she didn't seem to be sleeping well. Her brows were furrowed. He reached out and gently caressed her little face, murmuring, "I won't let you leave me." Even if he had to lose everything, he wanted to be with her. After watching for a while, he went to the bathroom to take a shower. When he came out, he smoked 2 cigarettes on the balcony. Lifting the blanket, he climbed onto the bed and lay beside her. Perhaps she felt the coolness of his body, but she resisted it. However, she was quickly pulled into his arms, and after hugging for a while, they did it again. She woke up and did not resist. She obediently lay in his arms. Under the warm yellow light, her features were exquisite, and her eyes were filled with deep love for him. He couldn't control his emotions, so he couldn't be gentle anymore. He was so rough that he made her cry. Later, she cried out in pain. Only then did he calm down. He lowered his head to look at her and kissed her. For a moment, they were in an extremely good mood. After that, she was so tired that she fell asleep. She lay in his arms. However, Yi Muyun didn't fall asleep. He leaned against her and gently rubbed her long fluffy hair with his fingers. Late at night, she woke up and looked up at him. "Brother, why aren't you sleeping?" He replied softly, "I can't sleep." She buried her little face in his neck and hugged his waist with her little hands, looking like she depended on him. Yi Muyun's voice was a little low. "Cher, I've never felt that I've done anything wrong, but this time, am I wrong?" He wasn't a conflicted person, and he never regretted anything. But now that it was related to Mumu, he really reflected on it. Was he wrong? Chapter 2075. It's not your fault. She hugged him. It's my fault. If I didn't want freedom, I wouldn't have provoked Zhou Chongwang. Yi Muyun reached out to hug her and sighed softly. Cher, how can I blame you? He rubbed her. Don't think too much, okay? Cher lay in his arms obediently. After a while, she raised her eyes and looked at him. Her voice was a little soft. You too. To him, these 3 words were salvation. He looked at his little cutie, who was so sensible, and soothed the anxiety in his heart. In the end, he hugged her and coaxed her to sleep. He did not sleep until dawn. At dawn, Cher opened her eyes and did not see anyone. She immediately lifted the quilt and grabbed the alarm clock to look at it. It was already 9 o'clock. She ran down in her pajamas and asked Sisterly, "Did brother go to the company?" Sisterly smiled and said, "He went early in the morning. He told me not to disturb your sleep. I'll call him later." Cher nodded and did not say anything else. She slowly walked upstairs. In fact, she wanted to ask Yimuyun's plan, but she did not dare to. After staying at home for a long time, she called Chin-mu. It was noon. Chin-mu was eating, but she could tell that he was not at school. "Mumu, where are you?" Cher asked sensitively. At this time, she was a little resistant to Chin-mu and Zhou Chongguang being together. She really could not accept that Mumu was so young. Chin-mu's voice was still soft. "I'm with Zhou Chongguang." "Cher, do you want to come?" Her voice was very light. "By the way, you can ask Zhou Chongguang to play Ode to Alice for your engagement with my brother. He plays this song very well." Cher was speechless for a moment. She wondered if Zhou Chongguang had deceived Mumu with this song. Her throat seemed to be blocked, and so did her heart. She thought about it and decided to go over. She didn't ask the driver to send her, but took a taxi herself. Fortunately, Zhou Chongguang did not take Mumu to a messy place, but to an elegant restaurant. Cher walked to the door and slowly walked in. Chin-mu noticed her and waved her over. Her expression was joyful, the expression of love. Cher was a little absent-minded. This Chin-mu was very healthy, very good. She recalled the time when Chin-mu's skinny body refused to eat due to depression and was on her last breath. At that time, Chin-mu didn't let her go either. Cher would never forget that blood for the rest of her life. She sat down. Zhou Chongguang's eyes were clear, just like the ray of sunshine that Gumei and Chin-mu liked. Sometimes, Cher couldn't be sure whether what had happened was real or fake. Was Zhou Chongguang the sun or the night? "I've told Chongguang that when you and my brother get married, he will play a song for you." Chin-mu was young, but she was already gentle and graceful. Cher laughed hoarsely. "It's still early for me to get married. I'm only 18 years old." She said this to Zhou Chongguang, which was equivalent to telling him that Mumu was only 14 years old. She didn't know whether he felt guilty or not. She only knew that Zhou Chongguang would not let go. It was like a drowning man grabbing a piece of driftwood. How could he let go? If he let go, he would be smashed into pieces. Zhou Chongguang smiled and then looked at Chin-mu. "It's a little early for you to get married at the age of 18. Chin-mu smiled and stuck out her tongue mischievously. "I remembered wrongly." Chapter 2076. Zhou Chongguang nodded at her, looking very affectionate. After they left, Cher's face turned cold, and her voice was a little agitated. "Zhou Chongguang, do you know that Chin-mu is only 14 years old?" Zhou Chongguang smiled and picked up the aperitif on the table. "Of course. But her body is already like that of an 18-year-old girl, isn't it? It's not even worse than yours." Cher was in a trance for a moment. She looked at the man in front of her. Yes, it was a man. Even if he had carried her to the infirmary 2 months ago, she said softly, "You're a beast." Zhou Chongguang laughed mockingly. "Are you talking about that? What about Yimuyun? Isn't he a beast?" If he isn't a beast, why are there so many hickeys on your neck? He suddenly got up, crossed half the table, bent down to look her in the eye, and spat out word by word, "Don't tell me, you haven't done it." Cher's little face was very cold, and her voice was even colder. "It has nothing to do with you." Zhou Chongwang suddenly grabbed her hand. "Tang Cher, we're still relatives in the future. I still have to call you sister-in-law like Qin Mu. If Qin Mu knows that I've always liked her respected sister-in-law, what do you think she will think? Will she be unable to bear this kind of blow? I don't know if she can bear it, but I know you're despicable." Cher broke free from his hand and sneered. "Zhou Chongwang, don't you look at your own face? Do you think Mu will always love you like this? As long as I want to, I can." Zhou Chongwang chuckled. Cher's little face was tense, and she became even colder. "Then you'd better clamp your tail between your legs." Right at this moment, Zhou Chongwang suddenly sat down, and his face no longer had the evil aura from before. Instead, there was a faint smile on his face, and he looked gentle like jade. Cher cursed in her heart. She really couldn't tell that Zhou Chongwang was not only good at playing the piano, but also good at acting. She also sat up straight because she knew that Qin Mu was back. "What are you guys talking about?" Qin Mu sat down, held her chin, and looked around. "Cher, your meal hasn't arrived yet." She looked at the time. "I probably have to go to class. Do you want Chongwang to eat with you?" "There's no need for that. Let him take you to class." Snow forced a smile onto her face. Zhou Chongwang didn't comment. He helped Qin Mu up and said goodbye to Cher. They left together. The waiter just came over with the meal. Cher was not in the mood to eat, but she was so angry that she ate up the set meal, and her stomach was full. Then she called Yi Muyun. "Brother, I want to go to school." Yi Muyun nodded. "No one is stopping you." "I mean, I want to be in the same class as Mumu," the little girl emphasized. After a long silence, Yi Muyun said softly, "Cher, are you sure? Mumu is only in the second year of junior high." Qin Mu didn't seek to improve academically, but he did well in the corner interest classes. That was why he was still in the second year of middle school. His little wife, on the other hand, had already entered university. If she were to go back to the second year of middle school, what kind of brain circuits did she have? But since she said so, he also told her his plan. "Cher, after we get engaged, can I send you and Mumu to the United States? Take it as taking care of her for me." Especially before Qin Mu had a showdown with her family, he had to send her away. Cher was stunned at first, but then she understood, because he would have more work in New York in the future. Chapter 2077. Very obedient. Yi Muyun praised her a little. "If only Mumu was as obedient as you." Cher thought of something and said softly, "Mumu said that Zhou Chongwang will play when we get engaged. In his dreams." Yi Muyun spat out these 3 words. At this time, Guze called him for a meeting, so he said goodbye and told her to go home early. Cher obediently hung up the phone and stroked her belly. Suddenly, she felt that things were not so bad. At this time, it was less than a week before her and Yi Muyun's engagement. He came back very late every day, as if he had worked overtime for a long time. She didn't ask, but she knew that it was because of Glory. It was easy to go up the mountain, but it was difficult to go down the mountain. He had done so much in the early stage of buying Glory, and now he had to restore it. He had spent more energy and money than before. Even though he had not reached an agreement with Zhou Chongwang, Glory had indeed been returned to Zhou Chongwang. After that, Yi Muyun made an appointment with Zhou Chongwang for his father in a private room of a club. Yi Muyun did not attend this interview himself, because he was afraid that he would not be able to control himself and beat Zhou Chengwang to the ground. He had been guarding outside and had smoked about half a pack of cigarettes. However, he did not expect that his father was even more violent than him. Not only did Zhou Chengwang look for his teeth on the ground, but he also almost looked for his kidneys on the ground. Qin Anlin was really ruthless when he hit him. As a father, he had raised his little daughter up, and suddenly a beast came to him. No one would be willing to do it. There was a big commotion inside the room. Yi Muyun raised his eyes slightly and ignored it. He knew that Zhou Chengwang did not dare to fight back. That man held the Qin family's lifeblood, but he still had to endure this kind of pain. He knew that if he was not beaten to death, Qin Mu would still be his, and he could also play the trick of injuring himself. Yi Muyun smiled mockingly. Even his father couldn't remain calm. No one could remain calm about this matter. The door suddenly opened and Qin Anlin walked out. Muyun, take him away. I'll teach him a lesson later. Yi Muyun couldn't help laughing. Don't you care about Mumu's feelings? That girl doesn't know anything. Qin Anlin said coldly, if I don't kill her today, my surname is not Qin. He dared to touch my daughter, Qin Anlin. Let's see how many lives he has. Yi Muyun sighed. Dad, you're becoming more and more like Grandpa. You mean that old thing, Su Shiqing? Qin Anlin frowned. He is a scum. In the future, don't mention this person in front of your mother. This hatred was immense. But Yi Muyun didn't agree with his son's approach. He smiled faintly and said, when Mumu finds out, she will hate you. Why don't you kill her now? Qin Anlin looked at his son and patted him on the shoulder. In fact, you're more like Su Shiqing. I said I won't mention it. Yi Muyun frowned and then walked into the private room. As soon as he entered the room, he covered his nose. What a strong smell of blood. Zhou Chengwang was lying on the ground, his face covered with blood, and his chest was heaving up and down. You can kill me now. It's useless to scare me. Yi Muyun stepped on Zhou Chengwang's chest and sneered. I can't scare you, can I? Zhou Chengwang coughed up a mouthful of blood. Yi Muyun, I have nothing to lose. I'm not like you, who have scruples. Yi Muyun twisted his foot gently a few times, and Zhou Chengwang spat out a few mouthfuls of blood in succession. It seemed that he was hanging by a thread. Chapter 2078. Yi Muyun's voice was very faint. You still have one last chance to make a choice. Zhou Chengwang bent over and spat out mouthfuls of blood. His body was also twitching slightly. Zhou Chengwang, you should know me a little. Even if I kill you now, it's not a big deal. Yi Muyun squatted down and reached out to pat Zhou Chengwang's face. Zhou Chengwang raised his eyes, which were a little weak. He looked at them for a long time and chuckled. He tried his best to turn his body over and lay flat. He turned his head to look at Yi Muyun and said, you can give it a try. See if your baby sister can also survive. The blue veins on Yi Muyun's forehead popped out. He slowly stood up. At this time, he really wanted to kick this scourge to death. He really kicked him hard and hard. Zhou Chengwang spat out a mouthful of blood, and the whole room was filled with the smell of blood. In the end, Qin Anlin came in and grabbed Yi Muyun. Okay. This guy is sure that you don't dare to kill him, and he knows that pestering Mumu is the only way out. Otherwise, if Mumu was fine, the first thing Yi Muyun would do was to chop Zhou Chengwang to vent his hatred. Yi Muyun stopped and looked at Zhou Chengwang, who was lying on the ground. At this time, Zhou Chengwang had fallen into a coma and was on the verge of death. Call an ambulance. Qin Anlin shook his head. He's really a tough nut to crack. He won't let go even after being beaten like this. Yi Muyun was also very upset. He scratched his head, but he still listened to Qin Anlin and made the call. At this time, it didn't matter if Zhou Chongwang died. The key was that if he disappeared, Mumu would probably not be able to bear it. Mumu was the only weakness of the Qin family. If Mumu didn't have that disease, Yi Muyun would have directly chopped him up based on what Zhou Chongwang had done. The ambulance drove over and carried Zhou Chongwang to the hospital. The club knew that it was Mr. Yi who did it, so no one dared to make a sound. Qin Anlin and Yi Muyun didn't leave immediately. Instead, they smoked 2 cigarettes and calmed down. Qin Anlin patted Yi Muyun's shoulder and advised in a faint voice, "Take it slow. Muyun, why don't we get Mumu abroad first? We'll teach this guy a lesson. Do you think Mumu will still like him if he loses a leg or an arm?" Yi Muyun leaned against the wall and puffed out a cloud of smoke. When he heard his father's words, he glanced sideways. "Don't you understand your daughter's temperament? Not to mention losing an arm or a leg, even if all the parts of his body were gone, as long as the main body was called Zhou Chongwang, Mumu would still be stubborn." Qin Anlin was momentarily at a loss for words. After a while, he thought of something and said, "Why don't we hold a party for Mumu and find some young pianists? We'll find someone like Zhou Chongwang." Yi Muyun looked at his father and obviously felt that as he got older, his IQ was getting lower and lower. He pursed his lips and said, "Zhou Chongwang is not dead yet. Will she fall in love with someone else? Let's try everything we can." Qin Anlin's eyes lit up, and he felt that this plan was feasible. However, he thought of something else and coughed softly. "Do you think Zhou Chongwang will tell Mumu that we almost killed him?" "No." Yi Muyun sneered. "His pride won't allow him to do so." Qin Anlin was relieved, but Yi Muyun couldn't help asking his father, "Dad, have you had a physical examination recently?" Chapter 2079. Qin Anlin didn't get it yet. He looked at his son. "What's wrong? Let me accompany you to do a brain CT scan when I'm free. Your health is my happiness," Yi Muyun said very tactfully. Qin Anlin snorted. "You brat." But he didn't say anything. He just let Yi Muyun confirm the engagement. Yi Muyun returned to the company and called the company's public relations manager Lin. She was a beauty. Manager Lin was a little uneasy. Mr. Yi wasn't easy to get along with. Nothing good would happen if she called him over. However, she stood in Mr. Ye's office for a long time. Mr. Yi didn't say anything. He just rubbed his good-looking chin with one hand. Many girls in the company liked Mr. Ye's looks. But Mr. Yi was too cold and he was a few years younger than them. So, no one in the company dared to have any ideas on Mr. Yi. Yi Muyun thought for a long time before asking lightly, "Which pianists in the country recently?" "I want young ones, no more than 25 years old." Manager Lin was stunned. Mr. Yi was interested in men, and all professions had preferences. She couldn't figure it out and didn't reply for a while. "Doesn't your public relations department often plan events? It should be very clear." Yi Muyun's voice had a hint of displeasure. Manager Lin immediately replied, "There are a few famous ones. But, Mr. Yi, do you have any special requirements for their looks?" Yi Muyun finally knew that Manager Lin had misunderstood. He glanced at her and said lightly, "It's my engagement. Cher asked someone to play Alice. As for the looks, it depends on her mood. Send the photos to my email." Manager Lin understood that this matter must be done well. This pianist was handsome, but he couldn't be more handsome than Mr. Yi. In fact, how many people could be more handsome than Mr. Yi? Manager Lin left and sent the list of names to Yi Muyun's email in less than half an hour. Yi Muyun opened it and glanced at it. In the end, she still left the decision to her wife. Cher was also a young girl, so she should know more about young girls. After he got off work and returned to Pei Garden, he went to the study after dinner. Cher was curled up on the bed playing with her tablet. After he finished showering, she was still in the same position. Won't your eyes hurt from looking at it? Wearing a bathrobe, he sat beside her and snatched the things from her hands. She was playing a game, and even though she was in a mess, she still looked like she was enjoying it. Cher snorted. I'm not done yet. He chose to leave, took her with one hand, and pressed her into his arms. His voice became a little more gentle. Cher, I'm going to talk to you about something serious. She was surprised. He still had something serious to talk to her about. But thinking about it, it should be about Mumu, so the little girl sat up in his arms. He glanced at her and then opened the email. There were photos of several young musicians in it. Which one is the most good-looking? He looked at her and asked. Cher flipped through it and looked up. They all play the piano. Yi Muyun smiled. Cher bit her lower lip. But none of them are as good-looking as Zhou Chongwang. I guess Mumu won't like them. She felt that there was nothing wrong with her words, but after saying that, Yi Muyun's voice sounded dangerously. Do you think Zhou Chongwang is good-looking? Chapter 2080. In the end, she was pressed down. Yi Muyun's fingers gently stroked her red lips, and his voice became more dangerous. Is he better looking than me? Cher's back hurt. She glared at him with tears in her eyes and said, if you do this again, I'll say yes. Did I hurt you? His expression was unfathomable. She pouted and snorted softly. Yi Muyun narrowed his eyes and looked at her. Then I'll be gentle, okay? It was probably because of Mumu. Although they had sex before, they didn't really indulge in it. It was also probably because he had beaten Zhou Chongwang so badly today that he felt happy and in a good mood. However, Cher was tortured to the point that she wished she was dead. She kept begging him, but he didn't let her go. It was already a few hours later when they finished. She lay in his arms, sweating profusely, and pointed at a photo. Him. He looks a little like Huang Xian. Yi Muyun looked at it but didn't say anything. After indulging in it for so long, neither of them had the strength to wash up, so they fell asleep. Early in the morning, Cher was woken up by a kiss. She opened her eyes and saw that Yi Muyun was tying a tie. She turned over and lay on her stomach, looking at him and gently hooking his tie with her little hand. He bent down and kissed her lightly on the lips. Help me tie it, okay? As he said that, he dragged her little body out of the quilt. As soon as Cher got out of the quilt, she felt that he did it on purpose. This was because she was only wearing a white silk camisole, and it was the kind that was very close-fitting. It was the kind that was very seductive, especially under the morning light. The fabric was a little translucent. She knelt down and looked up. Her long ink-like hair was scattered behind her, showing her small curves. Yi Muyun held her waist and said in a hoarse voice, "You're such a torturous little thing." Cher bit her lips. She suddenly gave up on the tie and hugged him instead. She wrapped her arms and legs around him, even her soul had disappeared. "This is what you call torture." She kissed his chin. Her voice was soft and gentle, carrying a hint of pure temptation. Yi Muyun raised her hand to look at her watch and bit her little ear. "We have to leave in half an hour. But if I hurry, I should be able to make it in time." His voice was slightly sinister. Then he picked her up and walked straight to the French window. The white curtains were beautiful, and there was a beige sofa in the corner. The morning sun shone on it, making it look especially warm. Cher was placed on top of him, and the tie that he had just finished tying was loosened once again. "Brother, you are never late." She moved her small body in fear, shrinking into the sofa. But the more she acted like this, the more he wanted to bully her. This time, not only did he indulge himself, but he also enjoyed himself to the fullest. By the time it ended, he was naturally late. Mr. Yi carried the little girl back to the bed, kissed her forehead, and comforted her with a smile. "You can sleep more. You can discuss the engagement with Mom in the afternoon. As for the person who will play the piano, you can choose. I'll ask Manager Lin to contact them." Cher was still angry at him for not being able to control himself. She snorted softly and didn't say a word. Yi Muyun smiled, reached out to rub her hair, and went straight to work. When he went downstairs, he couldn't help but say a few words to Sister Lee. "You're tuning in to the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."